Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Brown from Research Triangle High School. The purpose of this presentation is to give you a little bit of an overview and some analysis of some of the things that the author is doing in the first 6 chapters of Cry the Beloved Country. And one of the first things you'll notice about chapter 1 is that it's very short. It's just this page and a half. And that the author seems to be talking to you directly. They're using this second person method of address. So they say to things like, you look down on one of the fairest valleys and all about you there is grass. So it's putting you, the reader, directly into the story and creating the sense of intimacy and connection, like the author is literally talking to you. You'll notice it has this choral style, like a song with these rhythmical devices. There's lots of repetition of key phrases, some really strong imagery, and almost a hymn-like quality. There's this reverent tone, words like sacred ground and stand unshod upon it, and evoking the idea of the creator. And this very poetic structure using this parallelism and symmetry with all of the stuff that you see in chapter 1. Here's a sample picture of what a South African valley would look like that was lovely beyond any singing of it. Now in chapter 2, more of the traditional story and narration begins. The voice shifts to the third person, and we find ourselves in the setting of this village of Datcheni, where the people are very poor, largely uneducated. We learn this, that letters come very infrequently, that this is kind of a big deal that a letter is arriving, and that many young people have left the village. We meet Stephen Khumalo, who is a minister, and we find that he's very well respected, he's very kind, he offers the little girl something to eat, has the mother take care of her, but he's still very poor, and that money becomes an issue in every decision that they make based on this letter. You'll also notice the use of native names in the language. You see Umfandis, Artikso, using these words and stuff again to help evoke this sense of place. We also see in chapter 2 that the way people greet each other again evokes this idea that you're in this other country. The greetings are very ritual and poetic. Go well, stay well. There's a little bit of foreshadowing that the author's dropping to you when they get the letter, saying, as he's sitting there wondering what this news is about, saying, once such a thing is opened, it cannot be shut again. And this is where we get some of the backstory. We learn that Stephen Khumalo's sister had left the village going into the big city to look for her husband who had left earlier. We notice that their son Absalom has also left. And we learn a little bit about the parents' hopes that they had once upon a time imagined that they would have this really big family, but they only had the one son. And they had pictured their son going to school at St. Chad's to college, but none of that has really happened. And there's been no letters or word or stories at all about their family members that went off to the city in quite some time. And we also introduced this first idea that some of the problems that the village is having is blamed on city culture, on what the white man has done to the tribe. And here's a picture of Stephen Khumalo as played by James Earl Jones in the film version. Now, chapter 3 echoes back to chapter 1. We see the point of view shifting back again to the second person, and the imagery is that of almost like a camera that starts off really far away, describing all these things at a distance, and then gradually kind of moves into the close-up. We learn the sense that the city is a place of danger and fear. It's really large, it's unfamiliar. And this is contrasted with the village where the only bus that comes is the right bus. And we learn that Khumalo is not alone in his fear of the city and what the city has done to the family. We have this note that Sebeko's daughter has also gone missing and many others that have previously gone off. And this general sense that once a child goes to the city, they don't come back home again. Now, the train is the first part that we really get introduced to this idea of separation, both in a figurative way, but also in a literal way, and how the apartheid rules are affecting these people. We learn that the whites and the Europeans have their own cars, that they don't really even take the train at all. But the blacks, on the other hand, are poor. And even if the whites do take the train, they have their own special car up front where the blacks are not allowed to go. We learned that a lot of the men have given up their traditional dress and culture, and instead they're now wearing kind of European and Western clothes. And this is symbolic of a man who lives, as the story says, in a world not made for him, whose own world is slipping away, being destroyed beyond any recall. And the only certainty and comfort that Stephen Khumalo feels is when he turns to his faith, and he opens up his sacred book, his Bible, and starts reading that on the train. So to summarize the first 3 chapters, we're only 3 chapters in, and we've already been introduced to most of the major themes of the story. This idea of Khumalo's journey and quest, the breakdown of the family, the destruction of the old way of life by the new city culture, this love and connection to the land, which is the beloved country, and that the connections with faith and with people are what will bring you comfort and peace. And here's a picture of what a crowded train might have looked like on its way to the mills or to the city. Now, chapter 4 opens and it repeats some of the phrases and images from chapter 1. The point of view shifts again from this imperative second person that's giving you direction, saying you have to do these things, and pulls back out to that more omniscient third. The train here shows the magnitude of the problem, of just how many people are affected by this. And then we see Stephen Khumalo's arrival in Johannesburg, and this is where the young man asks him if he is a Xhosa or a Zulu, and then takes advantage of his naivete by robbing him, basically, by saying, oh, I'll go buy you your train ticket, and then Khumalo finds that, no, you buy the train tickets on the train, or you buy the bus ticket on the bus itself. But on the other hand, this first experience that he has with being deceived and lied to is set off a little bit by the idea that he's also forming some new allies. This Mr. Mofolo who comes and helps him, the people that he meets at the parish, and probably the most important character that he's going to meet, which is Theophilus Misimangu, who they also just refer to as Misimangu. Chapter 4 introduces us to 2 really important concepts of the book. The first is the idea of an extended metaphor. Now, you all know a metaphor is an indirect comparison between 2 unlike things. But in a piece of literature, an extended metaphor can be something that applies across the entire text. So it's an indirect comparison that's carried beyond the single reference and will be used throughout the whole work of literature. And in this story, we see that the city of Johannesburg becomes an extended metaphor for how white industrialized society is breaking down the black tribal family structure. We also introduced this idea of an initiation story. Now, an initiation story is a little bit different than a coming-of-age story because it doesn't necessarily involve a young person growing up, but it has some of those features in common. Usually you have this naive individual, but someone who's sensitive and is aware of the things around them. They're plunged into this new environment and have to deal with a crisis or with a series of crises. And in the process of that conflict, changes and often grows and moves from the state of naivete into a state of experience and awareness. So these 2 thoughts, an extended metaphor with the city and this initiation story for Stephen Khumalo, are going to be things that we'll take a look at over the course of the entire novel. And here's a sample of what might have been facing Stephen Khumalo when he gets off the bus for the first time in Johannesburg. Chapter 5 is another chapter of contrast. We see this set up with Stephen Khumalo finding both allies and people to help him on his journey, but also finding disillusionment that a lot of the hopes and things that he had are not going to happen. In Allies, he meets this visiting priest who's described as rosy-cheeked from England. At the table in the parish, there's another man who's from his own village, and he gets this warm welcome as he starts to so lovingly describe his village, and everyone listens with rapt attention where he's from. But at the same time, the conversation with Misimangu also dashes a lot of his hopes. He learns that his brother has actually left the church. Now remember, Stephen Khumalo is a man of God, he's a minister, so to find out that his brother doesn't go to church anymore, doesn't believe, doesn't behave in a Christian fashion is really heartbreaking to him. He's learned that his sister, her sickness is actually a moral sickness, that not only did she not find her own husband, but she now has many husbands, which means she's turned to prostitution and alcohol and is just living this really irresolute life. And there's all of these images of brokenness and separation. And where does Stephen Khumalo turn to find faith, to find comfort? In his faith, in the companionship of these people and the allies that he does meet, and in the idea of hope that they might still be able to rebuild what was broken. Here's an example of a city corner in Johannesburg that might be frequented by prostitutes and criminals. Now, chapter 6 brings the first part of the story to an end. Kamalo set out to find his sister. He got a letter that she was sick. He finds her, he brings her back, and we have kind of a little mini ending to that. But of course, in the process, he goes down a different rabbit hole in the search for his son. So when he does find his sister, she's absolutely ashamed. She's horrified. She's scared. She knows how far she's fallen from grace. She knows what amount of shame she's bringing on the family with her brother being a minister and the way she was raised. And we see that these family bonds are not just broken between Kamalo and his sister, but that she's not being much of a mother anymore. She doesn't know where the child is. She's never found her husband. She doesn't know where her nephew Absalom is. But at this point, she does cry, fall to her knees, ask for forgiveness, says that she wants to change. So we see the story of reconciliation and redemption. There's a little bit of foreshadowing thrown in when he first starts this search. We see this newspaper headline that talks about this couple that was beaten and robbed, and people say, you know, this happens every day here. There's always this crime and there's this fear. Everyone's afraid of everyone else. So pay attention to that, because the author's setting you up for some of the things that are going to happen later on. But we do have this sense by the end of the chapter of repair and reclamation. Kamalo forgives his sister. He takes her in to start over. The child represents a new hope, and he buys the child some new clothes and buys his sister some new clothes, with this idea that, you know, with a new clothing, you can remake your image and start your new life. So chapter 6 actually ends on kind of a hopeful note. We have this mystery about what's happened to Kamalo's son Absalom, and that's going to take us through the next chunk of the book. But that's it for the first 6 chapters.